All right, everybody. We're ready to get started. Class is in session. I want to welcome y'all. Maybe let me get out of the sun, direct sunlight for you. We're trying to do something about the sunlight. We're going to turn it down a little bit. Well, welcome to Workshop Digital. We're your friendly local digital marketing agency. I know at this point, almost all of you have been here before. We've crossed paths and worked together in the past. So it's good to see a lot of familiar faces and some new faces. So for those of you that haven't been here before, for years we have hosted and helped organize a digital marketing meetup group called DigitalRVA. So we are like-minded groups of data-driven marketers, nerds, geeks, analytical people, whatever you want to call us, that just love to get together and share ideas, learn from experts, kind of cross-pollinate what we're working on, what's working, what's not working. We do it all under this DigitalRVA umbrella. So glad you're here. We do this about 6 times a year. And if you're here, you're already on the email list, so you're going to hear about future events coming up. Tonight, we have 2 founders from the Lighthouse Labs cohort that's going on right now down the street. They're based in Northern Virginia, but funneling all their effort and talent through Richmond at the moment. Dr. Ashley Sherry and soon-to-be Dr. Jacob Tucker from EmpathixAI. They're doing some awesome work integrating their background in social sciences, research, and layering in AI and a lot of other technology that is actually built out, unlike some other Lighthouse Labs companies that are proof of concept stage. Nothing wrong with that. But they have a product to share and demo, and they are excited to share that with us tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We will try to work through the technology piece if any issues come up. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, we can make it a dialogue if you all have time. Otherwise, we'll do plenty of time for Q&A and hanging out at the end and wrap up, get you out of here on time at 6:30. So thank you all for being here. Welcome our hosts, our guests.
All right, I'm not wearing a watch, so someone tell me if we go over. But I'm Ashley, co-founder and CEO of EmpathixAI. My background is in anthropology and public policy, and our company is about 16 months old. So yes, we have a product in market, we have customers, but what we're really excited to talk to you about today is the intersection of human beings and AI. It's something that is really coming up quite a bit, as it should, as a concern. People are concerned that human beings will be replaced by AI. People are concerned that human beings aren't being centered enough. So I was at an AI conference in DC very recently with the anthropologist at Intel. We tend to find each other in a crowd, and we both said the same thing. How do we center human beings in discussions of AI? How do we make sure we're centering human beings not only in thoughts about models and how they're built from the ground up, but how do we make sure we do that when we are applying our research to things like market research? It's probably one of the most important realms. Research on human beings without human beings is probably not the right research at all. And so that's really the focus of this talk today, that we'll try to cover the gamut of both, not just what we've built, but the things we've seen in market, things you can look out for, things that are really snake oil that you should probably turn your back and run away from, and how to differentiate them, because it's really hard. Those of you who are in AI, running nonprofits about AI literacy, that's the really big challenge today, is to see something that looks incredible in market, but figure out, does that work? Is that scientifically valid? Is what I'm about to embark on something that is useful? And is it, again, centering human beings? So those are the topics that we'll hit today. And yeah, I'll let Jacob introduce himself and we'll dive in.
Yeah, so I'm Jacob Tucker. I'm the CTO of Empathix. My doctoral work is in political science, political psychology, which is a lot of why building this has been so exciting, because it is an entirely new way of studying human beings. But like Ashley said, there's certainly a lot out there, some of which is good, and a lot of which is built by engineers that have never done research before, and can get a little bit frightening. So we're going to try to talk through all of that.
All right, yeah, next slide.
All right.
Okay, so a great LinkedIn post popped up this week. Oh, this is the wrong deck. Wrong deck, but I'll keep going and Jacob will find the right deck. So a great LinkedIn post popped up this week that talked about solutions in AI. And they used a word that I wasn't going to use tonight, but I'm told it's fine. It's half-assed solutions in AI. They are things that pop up and they look incredibly shiny. I was going to say half-baked, but then became like a drug joke. And so like it took a turn. It took a turn. But these solutions look incredible. They really emerge something like this. An entrepreneur shows up and they're like, ooh, shiny idea. These shiny ideas often come in market research. They come in sales. They come especially in any sort of outreach to human being area in which like you all are at the center of that. So they spot something and they're like, cool, cool, cool. Yep, think I can build that. Think I can build that. Finds a developer somewhere in the crowd. And then they're like, okay, yeah, I built it. And what it turns out that it is usually what they call a wrapper over a large language model. And so those are generalist models. We shouldn't be surprised that those models really aren't capable of doing the sales or marketing or work that you're doing because they're not trained for it. They're trained to give you information. They are not trained to elicit it or to analyze it in the ways that would be helpful to you as marketers. So they pop up, they're half-assed like we covered. We'll see if the bright slides pop up. And you can identify them in a few different ways. Yeah, this is the right talk. The title's right. Yeah. Scroll down.
Hopefully it makes, there we
Cool.
go.
You can identify them in a few ways. So we've covered half of this at this point. They're wrappers over LLMs, and they have incredible interfaces usually. They look pretty shiny, and they're easy to use, and you're like, oh, cool, this is pretty easy for me to do. What happens next is you start to find out that they're really not research-based.
Okay.
They have a lot of like fluffy language. One of our favorites is tapestry, the tapestry of this market research problem, the fabric of human beings at the center of your market research. And you start to feel like, no, that's really not grounded in what I'm looking at, which could be like B2B SaaS sales of like CEOs in cybersecurity. They're not talking about the tapestry of human behavior and how they feel. They are talking about things like security, and it is very different. And so you start to be able to see that these results that you're getting are going to fail in the real world. And you shouldn't be surprised that they fail because, again, they weren't built by market researchers usually, and they certainly weren't built by specialists in human behavior. They're built by a team of folks that spotted a really lucrative idea, and it is incredibly lucrative. The market research industry globally, as you all know, is $130 billion in 2023 alone, and $77 billion of that spend is right here in the United States. And so this field, of course, is rife with many solutions that look great, but really don't do the job that you need them to do. And that will become increasingly more true in the era of AI solutions. Okay. So what do you actually need from AI? If you're in market research, like we just talked about, you're spotting these subpar solutions all the time. They've got fluffy text, the numbers just don't equate. There are things that just don't sit right with you. You have expert intuition because that is your field. That is a very real thing in psychology. It's not like something that I'm here making up as a behavioral scientist. It's a thing that when you face a problem that is in a sector that you dominate, you know if something feels right or not. And if it doesn't, you really need to dig more because that expert intuition lets you know things like how people are thinking, when they're purchasing. You have data on these things, what they're doing, when they're doing it, maybe even a bit on how they're doing it. Maybe they're online shopping. But the space where AI becomes really powerful is where you can start to delve into why they're doing it. And I think on the market research human behavior side, that's where the value add is. Because if you've dealt with human beings, we are autonomous, we have diversity of opinion, and it becomes really difficult to scale that up and figure out what across populations makes sense for me to market to. If I don't want to just go with my gut feeling, how can I delve into that why? And that's really the space where AI and market research can come together. You can figure out those needs, you can learn about how they exist, and I think importantly for this crowd, you can figure out how to best reach them. So when you need to go beyond when people are doing something and what they are doing, for which we have incredible data, and you can just go pull that or buy that. It'll probably cost you like $120K from Nielsen to get data for what people spend on the shelf, but you can do that. That data exists. For the why, there really hasn't been much until AI emerged. unless you were an anthropologist in the field like me and you spent a year figuring out why human beings do what they do. Different skill set, really not related. So how do we know about all of the like shiny solutions and all of the poor solutions? It's because we spent the last almost 2 years really delving through them and building proprietary technology. And our tech, the first start, and I like to share this story, was the easy solution because we're academics and we were like, let's just build. Okay, yeah, this seems cool. Let's build that. Except it failed. And we shouldn't have been surprised that it failed at our core task, which is expert interviewing, because models that are built to give you information are not built to elicit information as experts. And what we wanted to replicate was expert human behavioral elicitation, like you would pay somebody, it's the average we give, we can lowball at $75 to go out and conduct a consumer interview. It's very expensive. You usually don't hire those people. You could hire someone to do that. We wanted to scale that task and we wanted to make sure that it was consistent and expert across the board. So the first one was a huge failure. It was actually pretty funny. After about 2 questions, it would just start to unravel. And again, we were like, cool, we'll scrap that. So almost 2 years ago, we scrapped that before we even founded our company. And then we started to build out from the ground up a proprietary AI model, not a generalist model, not a chatbot like ChatGPT, but really this new horizon of AI specialist models that can conduct work at the level of that expert intuition or at the level of a PhD who's trained in these things. We wanted to replicate that, a much more difficult task in AI. And so we learned from failures. We built something very different. At the core of our platform is a technology called Culture Chat. Culture Chat conducts deep one-on-one interviews with consumers at the scale and speed of surveys. So we're conducting full cycle representative market research, usually in 24 hours. So while we are standing here today, we are running interviews for clients, but we could be running a representative 1,200 person study in the next half an hour and return those results tomorrow. And I think that that's the power of AI, not just on the smaller tasks that we can use every day. And we're going to talk about a whole lot more tech than just our tech today. But that's the power to get to know human beings deeply. Data collection is one of those arms. We'll also dive into data analysis and then market research planning as other tools that we ourselves use and think are incredible. So we'll start with data collection and I'll turn it to Jacob to talk about that. We'll do some small amount of demoing, so we'll see how this goes. We already broke the PowerPoint.
Yeah, we'll see what other tech we can break today. Just because you can build an AI model does not mean that you can work a presentation. As you'll see as we start to go through this slide, most of what's actually out there right now is really just scaling up tasks that we used to do a little bit more manually, and that has a lot of power, right? And in a lot of ways, we actually like fit into that space. You know, one-on-one interviews are not a new thing. It turns out doing these in a chat interface is very different. We did have to develop new techniques for it. But in a lot of ways, it's scaling up what used to happen before. So there is a lot of power in that, and it does create new ways to do research. But what I hope you don't take from this is that that's all that we're going to get out of AI. And I would be really sad if our company was the best thing for human research that came out of it. I think there's a lot more that we're going to be creating in the future that can truly revolutionize the way that we do this. But a lot of what's out there is thinking about scaling. And so the first place that we've found that most companies end up going is this knowledge management, because as Ashley mentioned, there is a lot of data out there that companies have collected. A lot of that just like sits in PowerPoint decks and never gets touched again because it sits somewhere in some filing system that everyone's forgotten about in the last 20 years or so. Hopefully it's not just sitting on a floppy disk. But there is a lot of data out there that just people don't really know like where to find and where to access. And so a lot of tools have come about to do that. I don't think anything has really gotten past the like OpenAI custom assistant ChatGPT realm in terms of performance. The most powerful certainly are building out custom assistants that actually aren't that hard once you kind of get to know the OpenAI dashboard. But if you want a little bit more of a user-friendly interface and don't mind losing a bit of power, a lot of people like Notebook LLM. I opened it one time and kind of gave up pretty quickly because I'm just used to working in OpenAI. So I am not the right person to ask questions about it, but I know a lot of people like the interface. But I do think that this is a good example of a place too where it's important to stop and think about your research goals before going there. One of the kind of I think frightening trends that we've seen in the market research industry is that people will do this for things like load all of your interviews into something like a custom GPT and then ask it questions. The problem with that is you're using a RAG model on the back end, so it's going to find the probably 3 or 4 most relevant interviews and answer just based on that. And so you've suddenly taken, if you're running something on our platform, the sample size of 1,200 interviews that you conducted, and then making decisions based on 4 people. And that's a mistake that I think many people don't understand, including people who are building products for this that end up doing just that. They just load it into a custom. So if you need something where it's going to be representative of the audience or the data that you have, it's important to be thinking about that going into what tool you're going to use, and these are the wrong ones to use. And be very careful about any product that advertises a chat feature, because it probably does that. They probably just use an OpenAI assistant on the back end, which is why it actually took us so long to have a chat feature on our front end, even with many people asking for it. The next section is AI for data analysis. This, I think, is actually really underutilized because the tools that are out there tend to,
Sorry, maybe I'll step us back here on this question, but it seems like it's a chatbot that's masquerading as a survey, right? It's a survey. You're trying to leverage this to engage the community, whatever community that is, and market research, be able to define business model and need, and they need to figure something out. Do end users receive that well? Like if I'm the target audience and I see somebody saying, "Hey, fill out this survey through this chatbot," like how well received is that in the in the ecosystem? Just curious.
Yeah, very well. Actually, a lot better than I expected going into this. So what we found is that people who take surveys hate taking surveys, and I'm sure like all of you have been there, right? You've all taken an employee climate survey, felt deeply unheard, and probably didn't trust the survey anyway, because you're just putting people into little boxes. You're probably not asking the right questions, and no one really feels like they fit somewhere. It's terrible to go through 80 Likert scale questions. They're just a awful experience. With Culture Chat, people are able to be very open and have full conversations. They're able to share their thoughts. They feel heard. They feel empathized with. It turns into a deeply positive experience for people. We do collect data on this because we are a scientific company. It turns out about 80% of people prefer taking a Culture Chat interview to taking a survey. The kind of other 20% are the ones who are trying to just move through something faster to get paid, and that's fine. Certainly people do, but it tends to be a very positive experience for people. And one of my worries going into this is that we wouldn't be able to break down the wall of trust, because when you do field work, you end up spending months getting to know someone before you start to really build up enough trust to break down those walls. It turns out this preserves a level of anonymity, much like an online survey does, but where people can be very open, and they begin to share very deep experiences very quickly. And it's a problem I thought we were going to have to solve that we didn't, because it just happened.
Is that because the natural language breaks down the barrier of very static question answer formats to I'm getting to know you as I ask you questions? Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah, I think people feel very heard is a big part of it. I will say some of this is guesswork because we haven't quite figured out all of the why, but I think being heard is part of it. I think also the anonymity is part of it as well. When you're talking to someone face to face, you end up with a lot of biases built in because that's a transactional conversation. With this, we intentionally don't have an avatar. It doesn't have any kind of, it will never speak the words to you because we don't want any vocal biases. They can speak into it. There is a speech to text feature built in, but it removes all of those kind of social biases that come up when you're doing a human to human interview.
Thank you.
And that can happen even on deeply sensitive topics. We've done interviews in Russia about news about the war in Ukraine. We've done interviews on the political context in the United States, things that should be very sensitive, and it's really incredible to see what comes out of it. Yeah, so going back to other tools that are out there, the tools that are out there for data analysis, I think there tends to be, they tend to be built for people who do data analysis to make it a little bit quicker. But in reality, most of them have developed in a way that someone who has absolutely no idea what they're doing in analyzing data can just go use them. And they're actually pretty easy to access. You can just like drag and drop an Excel file into ChatGPT, give it enough context about what's in it, and that's kind of the key, is to tell it enough about what you need to know out of it and like what the data is, how it was generated, gathered, etc. And then it will just go run the code and like produce some plots for you that look really nice, and will probably get you as far as what a traditionally $15,000 to $20,000 data analysis contract would. And that can be an incredibly powerful way to take data that you already have, turn it into something really useful. So I would certainly encourage you to try it. The last couple are a little bit looser. One is the context of self-learning, which I think is particularly important because good research skills are rare. And these things are actually really good teachers about it. I actually did like use ChatGPT through grad school to like teach myself advanced statistical concepts, because it turns out it's actually a pretty good teacher about that stuff, as long as you don't need it to actually solve the equation, which it can't really do. There are also some pretty good academic tools out there, like Elicit, that's pretty good at literature reviews. Not ideal. I don't think there's like a phenomenal solution for that yet, but there are certainly things moving in that direction where it's going to get better. And then I do think it's important to mention synthetic data because this is starting to become popular and it's cheap. For a company that's very centered on collecting human data, I actually don't think the development of synthetic data is a bad thing. In fact, in a lot of ways, I think there are going to be a lot of positive impacts on the industry because of it. So synthetic data means it's a model that's built to generate data that looks like you would get if you went and ran the same thing on humans. So mostly this is like you design a survey, you have a whole bunch of AI agents answer the survey, and you get something that looks like response back. These perform quite good for stuff that gets asked all the time on surveys, which makes sense, right? Because it has a ton of it in the training data. And it turns out that like most surveys that are run are not asking anything very novel. And so in that sense, they're really quite good. And my hope with the synthetic data revolution, if you want to call it that, is that it will reduce the over-survey problem. Like we just run too many surveys, people are over-surveyed, it makes response rates really bad, it means you have to incentivize them really high, it creates a bunch of biases. My hope is that people start running fewer surveys as a result. And if you just want to know some like basic information about people, this is a pretty good way to do it. Without having to like get people to actually share surveys with each other, which will never happen because they treat it proprietary. Where it fails is where you need to go deeper. Human behavior is really difficult, and AI is not yet at the point where it can predict everything about human behavior. The easiest examples are if you need to know something contemporary, like how many people saw my ad last week. Obviously, a synthetic model is not going to do that. But even if you start to get much deeper into the why questions, needed to answer questions like a person would, and be able to like talk through their life experiences, etc., the synthetic data just isn't there yet. It's not going to be able to act like a human would once you need to start to get to those why questions. So it's important to just know when to stop using it. Unfortunately, there just isn't very much literature out there right now about where that stopping point is. And so I think it's better to treat it as earlier than later. And so it's something to treat as cautiously optimistic.
Just demo time.
So we're going to work through a couple of demos of these things. The first one that I think can actually be really useful for groups like this. Have any of you used O1 Preview before? A few? This is OpenAI's newest reasoning model. It's actually built on some like really interesting metacognition research that I can talk about for way too long, and so I will stop and not do that. But it's actually surprisingly good at generating research designs. So if you have a business problem and you know you probably need to do some research about it, but you don't know what a great starting point for that is, just passing it in is a pretty good way to do that. I think a good way to like show that it's not canned is to take a business decision from one of you. Obviously, nothing that you're not comfortable sharing in front of the group, but anything around human behavior. Yeah.
maybe say something like, I want to set up a new office in Latin America to any given country. Can you give me a financial and regulatory risk analysis to shortlist 3 countries I should?
Yeah, so I think it definitely could. I think I'm going to shift that a little bit.
I've been through this one.
Yeah, so because I want to show like research and yeah.
The alternative with like humans trusting automated ad generation versus research.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
We'll
not
come
that
back to
financial
Latin
regulation.
America.
Not that financial regulation isn't important, but that's kind of more of an information search thing, like a legal search, where I'm just trying to build in an example about human behavior. Yeah, so let's say I'm incapable of talking and typing at the same time, so you're probably going to have to watch me type for a minute.
There's a voice interface, right? Voice interface.
There is, yeah.
It's a pretty normal part of
They-
our company where I watch Jacob pause and just type and stop talking to me in the middle of meetings. It's fairly frequent.
About using AI tools to generate ad content. I'm concerned the perception this will create among my target audience. Is this kind of getting at the where you have, right, that like if you
There was
start
another-
using
there's a
AI
word
generated
we're missing.
content,
I know, okay.
Yeah, like the acceptance or confidence, like do I trust Twitter to like bring my ads for me, or do I need like an agency
Mhm.
to be running it for me? Does that make sense?
okay, so you're wanting to know like if they're good enough to,
Will humans trust a robot to create their?
oh, got it, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm like not sure if my clients will trust the use of AI to create ad content. Can you suggest a research design to test this so I can make the best decision possible? Dude, everything I need to know to be able to start
Yeah,
designing the
being
implementation.
incredibly specific ends up, as you all know who are working with this, if you're trying to generate a research design, the more specific you can be, the better your research design will come out. But it's still going to rely on your expertise as a human being to look at that and be like, okay, now like I have an idea how to execute this and this makes sense to me, or it doesn't.
All right, so it's going to suggest a mixed methods approach with qual and quant. The first is an exploratory qualitative research design to conduct in-depth interviews. I'm going to add in using culture chat or focus groups with select a group of clients, and then to do a confirmatory quantitative design. It's going to talk you through the sample selection. It's going to talk you through the sample sizes you need for it to be representative. And it's going to work all the way through the data collection. I'm not going to spend time reading all of this because it gives you quite a bit of data, but it should get all the way into, oh, it's even going to give you timelines here, some reporting steps, and then you can start to interact with this, ask it about like how to analyze the data once you have it, etc. It's a good way to start to get a sense of what your research can look like when you face one of these decisions, especially if you don't have a research background already. So the next thing I'm going to move to is the results platform on our platform. So this is the results of a culture chat research project. And I'm going to move through this in a way that I'm going to try to highlight some of the things that we've done to try to make sure that the results are as scientifically valid as possible and are things that you should look for anytime you're approaching a new research tool. So these are the results of a project that we did last fall before the Republican primaries. We interviewed just over 1,200 Republicans around the US. That equated to over 500 hours of interviews with over 1.2 million words.
And we did it in a day. So we're not calling any election for you for next week. Best of luck to everyone. But
Yeah.
Sure.
You mentioned like 1,200 people in a half hour, right?
Yeah.
How are you getting the chat or whatever the end user survey interface is in front of the 1,200 people or the 1 point, whatever that number was?
Yeah.
In a, whose audience are you?
We're tapped into about 100 panels, and then we do a lot of work on the back end to vet interviewees being sent from those panels. Interviewing is a very different task, to your point, than surveys. And so making sure that we're validating both who we're getting sent, and then we do a whole lot of validation once they're on our platform. So every conversational turn is being evaluated for engagement. So if somebody's on there and it's like, no, 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 we have a behavioral intervention, and if they don't respond to the intervention, they are gone from the platform. But I think that that's a really important thing about data quality on this. And as Jacob said, it wasn't even something we really had to solve for, because once people who don't like surveys figure out that it is an engaging, dynamic conversation where they have to talk about their lives, we usually don't have to do much to get them out, because it is not their vibe. And so we do a lot of work to make sure it's representative by pegging to census data and the populations that we're targeting because of that.
What was like the response rate? Audience size?
Yeah.
It varies based on the target audience. So if you've worked with surveys before, you'll know that there is a crisis of response rates right now. And we're certainly not immune to that. We haven't reinvented sampling. We do reasonably well in that it's not worse than most surveys for comparative audiences. We do have very stringent quality checks, which does mean that we end up quality and completing a little bit of a higher proportion than surveys do. Surveys we have a much easier time catching fraudsters and bots. And that's really just because our platform breaks them, like they're built for surveys. That's going to change as more of this happens. It's something we're going to always have to stay in front of, but at least right now it just breaks them a lot. So we do end up catching a lot of those kind of data quality issues. Technically that does lower the response rate, but it also means that like we're hitting real people more often. So it's not worse than a survey. It's something that we're always working to improve and figure out how to improve. And I think there are many innovations in the sampling space we're going to need to come to make it better. Yeah.
How do you gauge what kind of guardrails you need to ensure that you're picking people off the platform appropriately versus false positives and whatnot?
Yeah, so a few things. There's kind of everything from the simple nature of just having a really good like grading rubric that we use internally to know what kind of quality and completes look like and make sure that those are the ones getting kicked out, to consistently reading so many of these that we like know how people are interacting with the platform. And a lot of it actually does come down to a huge amount of manual work of just watching what these interviews are looking like. There was actually pretty recently some kind of innovation. We actually don't know what exactly they're doing, but some like automated responses started making it through our quality checks. And so we discovered that and we're able to get on top of it. So whenever you're paying people to do something, there's always the incentive to innovate and commit fraud on that platform.
There were 2 in a representative study.
Yeah,
but
so
like,
it's not huge.
But for us, like any is not okay. Like it needs to be human data. And so like we just increased our quality checks on that. I think one other element is the interview structure itself is divided into research territories, like any market researcher, and then Culture Chat will ask dozens of questions under each to get the answers that you need about your business decision. So moving back through those research territories to make sure each one was hit and that they reach a thing called theoretic saturation is really nerdy thing, but it turns out it's important in market research to make sure that the bounds of your knowledge on a topic are exhausted, but not in such a way that you become really angry. And so we want to hit the end of your knowledge, and then we want to release you. And that is hard. And that training task for an expert AI model took a really long time.
Yeah, that was one of the hardest things to teach it.
Yeah. And that was before we went into market. We had criteria that largely come from the social and behavioral sciences about, one, protecting people's personally identifying information, two, making the platform psychologically safe for them. We do a lot of work in food and beverage, but we also do a lot of work in health, right? And you need to be able to talk about things like abortion. You need to be able to talk about things like pregnancy loss or child loss when you're doing work on infant formula, or when you're doing work on any food item. We're doing macaroni and cheese interviews this week. Very exciting client, one of our favorite, but people have very individual and unique relationships with food. Culture Chat needed to be able to have those kinds of discussions in the way I would running a research interview.
And how, or what is your secret sauce on protecting people from themselves with their PII?
Similar to any researcher, you need to be able to back off of people when they are revealing so much that it becomes maybe not great for them, right? If it's not related to the research questions, then we don't need to push a person that far. And respecting that is on the interviewer. And so in our case, respecting that is on Culture Chat and on us for that training. On PII, we don't collect any PII. We actively tell people not to put it on our platform, and then we run models to strip any incidental PII on the back end before we give it over to any clients. And like that is just a pretty strict commitment from us on the ethics side.
And that's to the extent of making sure we never get PII passed over from the panel providers to we aren't grabbing any information off of their systems. Everything is encrypted end to end before it gets checked to make sure there's no PII in it. So we do a lot. I think over the last year and a half, we've probably had 10 people put some kind of identifying information in, and it always gets caught by our models and stripped out. So
yeah,
it's something we take very seriously. So once you've collected that enormous amount of data, the first thing that we do to analyze it is produce this executive summary. Now, I'm sure any of you who have worked in AI before have encountered summarization tasks. It's one of the early things that people started using this for. This actually does function a little bit differently than many of those do, because it's not just trying to grab whatever the most relevant information is. It's trying to capture the center of the distribution. So I'm not going to talk through how that works. That would involve drawing up proofs of asymptotic statistics that I am sure no one wants to sit through. But this is built to find that center of the distribution. So you don't want to be looking for tools that are just summarizing stuff. You want to find things that are actually trying to capture that distribution.
So that you know how important it is. It's not just a summary, but it's in this case, it is a summary that is organized by order of importance of what emerged in the Republican interviews that we ran last fall. So in this case, this executive summary is telling you the things that were most important to a representative draw of Americans before that vote. And that is much more important than just here's some random stuff that everybody said in the interviews, guys. And we like people to go all the way back to the raw data. So every sentence in our dashboard is clickable. It recovers direct quotes from the interviewees. You can go from those quotes from the interviewees all the way back to the transcript. So you can read what happened in that person's transcript so that you don't have to take the word for it of an AI model. You're able to go back and say, okay, here's what the human beings in my interviews have said about the things that are important to me. And that level of down to source justification for what is in our dashboard is something that filters all the way through, and it is exactly what Jacob said about finding that center of the distribution. These are the things that are important, and then you should go and figure out how people talk about them so you can either connect with people better, sell better. Yeah.
I'm just curious, if it adjusts as the users interact with it, how do you fit from leading into this question?
Yeah, so it will reach that point of saturation on each topic and then move on. So if we're doing a customer discovery interview, I think this is a great example. It will start with kind of the range of your knowledge on a topic to ground you in that type of experiential questioning. And then it will move into the specifics of the questions that that brand might have about maybe how you view frozen foods, or maybe how you view health in the intersection of frozen. And it will move on as it has hit your limit and ability to respond to those in new ways. And so those checks that we talked about are constantly monitoring so that it doesn't move on too fast. And so if you say something that contradicted yourself, it can go back later and say, oh, hey, earlier you mentioned this, just wanted to check in here. The types of things that a good interviewer would do.
That's something very negative, depending on how
Yeah.
Pretty strong negative. And even that, so I'm just curious, based on their answers, if they're coming off very negative in this question that comes off of that is not leading them to take it to negative. Is this still like an
That's
unbiased
interesting.
question?
Yeah, it's trained to be empathetic, but not confirming.
That's
and so it's not going to lead people into the answers. It is going to make sure that they feel heard and feel understood, but it's not going to like become negative.
Yeah, and you can imagine in political interviews, not validating people's choices is incredibly important. You need them to talk about their experiences and why they view the world in the way that they view the world. But you can't be like, yeah, that's cool, me too. And that's for politics, and that's for really any topic. Agreeing in that way would just be a violation of interview standards.
It may seem like a small thing, but time is so important, and literally the time that a human is replying to these answers to complete the survey. Have you all had to say, well, because it's conversational, we actually need to strip down the amount of questions we would normally want to ask them, because some of them just start ranting, and we might need to get an answer in half an hour's worth of time, or all of the same answers from everyone in 1 hour's worth of time.
Yeah, so whenever we run a project, we usually are trying to return results in about 24 hours, partly so that we don't hit that problem. We want people to be able to spend the time that they want to spend on the project. Now that said, focus is important in any research context, and no interview can cover everything that someone thinks about everything. And so there is always that kind of focus trade-off. But time also isn't really the right way to measure the amount of data that comes out of it, because some people are really slow typers. Some people like take a lot longer to complete thoughts. It's why we also like to lean into things like number of words. We do have people that will spend well over an hour on here. We have people that leave and come back to it. And so it does vary a lot how long people spend. And we don't want people to be constrained in what they're able to express because of that.
But yeah, if you're moving through the interview and you're answering the questions, Culture Chat will not continue to engage you on the same question. It's going to let you move through that arc. So you might be a person that's like, I gave my answers and they were full answers, and you're moving on and you're moving through that at the rate that probably, if it's done right, and we hope it is, should feel really natural to you as a conversation.
Can you share some of the questions that were asked?
Yeah, I might kind of have it was like a bit of depth or something. Like just to kind of see it.
Yeah. Let me
Yes, I think the question was like, what are the questions asked? Like, is it if you are putting any questions, or you prompting Culture Chat to ask people questions that will return information in certain buckets or adapt this?
Yeah, so it's structured in research territories. And so a good interview will normally have about 6 research territories. We call this kind of the modern interview guide. If you've ever built an interview guide from scratch, you know they can be incredibly time consuming. They can be really hard to do. This is meant to abstract away from that process so that you don't have to come up with every follow-up question. Because when you really think about it, we used to meet with clients who were like, I have a 40-page interview guide. And we'd be like, cool, cool, cool. How much of that do you get through? Like, and they'd be like, oh, well, like, I've got these topics that I have to hit, but like not much. And it's like, yeah, that's the real honest part for every researcher, is we have these territories that we need to cover, but we need to cover them in different ways for each human being. And so this is meant to do that. You define your research territories. Culture Chat is meant to be adaptable and ask dozens of questions that move with that person to hit that territory.
Do you ask them to interact with websites or anything while you're asking, or is it purely just based off of the
we can.
Yeah.
We try to be very careful about that. Depending on the use case of the interview, it's something that we find that people tend to jump to pretty quickly, when in reality what they need to know are things that you don't want to confine the space of the conversation to what they just saw. And once you show someone a stimulus like that, you're just asking about that, and you've confined the space really quickly. And so we find that most of the stages of research that people are at, it just doesn't really make sense to, until a certain point where it starts to make sense to show people stimuli, measure it, et cetera. And actually, one of the things that we can also do is use the results of interviews to then inform an experimental design afterward, whether that be an A/B test online or an ad development. We can set up a model around it to develop that, or run it through a survey experiment, which is particularly useful for like product design and something physical where you need to show attributes.
Jacob, just a quick time check. We're pulling that up. We're coming up on 6:20 or so. So I want to make sure that the questions are awesome. The responses are great. I want to make sure you all are good to keep going. And if anybody's getting close to 6:30 and it's getting to be dinner time, or I think they got kids done.
To be able to grab the link to the demo, I needed to go to a dashboard and didn't want to flash any client info. Let me go back and reshare my screen here.
I think we're breaking your TVs, Kate.
Just to settle for a minute there. So this is culture chat. So this is what an interviewee would see when they come in. I can zoom in a little bit so it's visible. Of course, they have to move through the legal stuff. We do give them a fair bit of information about their PII, et cetera. And then the first thing they're going to do is answer a set of closed-ended survey questions. The reason for this is to be able to disaggregate it on the back end. So over here on the dashboard, you'll get these audience segments. This one, which I did not give a name and probably should have, is undecided voters. So people who hadn't decided who they would vote for yet. When you click on that, the entire dashboard updates and you can see results just for that segment. So that's why we include these. We try to never include very many. I'm just going to click.
Questions. They will ask at a 6th grade level if something says they have those.
Yeah, and it will, it can, particularly if there's a question like here we included a vote choice question, it can reference that like they said they were voting for Donald Trump. So it does give them some information about a person going in as well. And then there is also always some demographic information, usually age, gender, and zip code that comes in from the panel provider. So we don't have to ask because they're pre-mapped. So there's a little bit more here than what you've seen.
This is really like a great spot where a lot of our clients add things that are hyper specific to them. Like, did you buy frozen foods in the last week? How many times did you go out to eat, right? Or which ingredients are important to you? Things that you know on the back end are going to be important for you to know. Here's how this group of specific people that I'm quite interested in feel about what I'm looking at.
So then this is culture chat. And this is how people interact with it. Is we've tried to make it feel like you're texting a friend, and people tell us that it feels like you're having that kind of conversation.
It's optimized for mobile, of course, not this giant screen, but it is meant to feel like a chat, and it's meant to start again in behavioral interviewing from these really high-level concepts, and then narrow down with people as you gain their trust and confidence to share more about their direct experiences. So you'll see we're starting with sort of a softball question. What do you know about the campaigns? That's a normal question that you would open a traditional interview with, right? Like, oh, which beers do you typically drink if we're doing like a study on alcohol, these types of things. And then it will build as the interviewee provides information. This is just so timely that it's election-based.
Yeah, I should say that
we had a
that
market
the Republicans
researcher
are,
example, but
I am attempting to impersonate respondents based on what I have read.
Yeah.
So do not take anything that I write as an endorsement of any candidate, use platform.
Yeah.
etc.
People spend the time if they want. Like I said, they're told they're going into an interview, and they tend to spend about 34 minutes, and that's by their own choice. They can.
Or they just end
They can end the interview at any time, but usually what happens is they make it through the entire arc because, as I mentioned, when you're providing information, the interviewer is moving on with you. So it's not going to be like, and tell me again where you get your news, and tell me 6 more times where you get your news. It's moving on like a normal interview. Cool, that's where you get your news. What things stand out to you? And then, okay, you've told me what things stand out to you. Okay, what types of issues do you want?
And the interview, I mean, just going and going.
Culture chat can end the interview and can suggest to you that it's great. And do you have anything more to add? Halfway through, we usually get people go, even though we've told them over and over, wait, human or AI? And culture chat is always like, I am an AI interviewer here to talk to you. And then usually at that point they gender it and are like, thanks, Mr. AI, this is great. Or wow, really? And then they keep going. And so it really does build a level of trust that a normal interviewer would seek to build with an interviewee that they're trying to learn from.
The information weighted based on how much time they spend in the interview. Like if they only answer questions for 2 minutes, is there that information still weighted the same as someone who's spent?
Yeah. Yes. And statistically, if you know, I won't go into the details of why or how it works. Statistically, that's actually like not a trivial problem to solve.
You're over
So it's one that we put a lot of work into at first to make sure that it wouldn't get underweighted. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to make sure you have time to cover everything you want to cover too. Is there anything else that you wanted to make sure you cover?
You might pop back to the dash really quick. Yeah, so in studies that aren't this, like we are obviously not going to provide recommendations on the election, but what we found is people really want recommendations for their business decisions. So our intake platform is natural language, and it's really focused around the business decision that you're looking to make. And then it generates proposals. So based on the things that you've told the platform that you need to know about, it will generate proposals that you're able to look at and refine. And we think that that level of engagement has been really great for people because they can look, okay, this is the type of interview project that's going to run. These are the types of things it's going to focus on. Like that human at the center of that work is still there. And after that, it launches. And this panel, not for here, but will normally have recommendations around your business decision. So we ran something for a client yesterday, and it'll be a public case study for us on a frozen foods brand that's an incredible brand, and he really needed to know recommendations for who to target next and what to bring to market next, and how to build out marketing campaigns to connect with those people. That's what he has in his recommendation section. And the chat feature has turned out to be, should be very familiar from what we've demoed today, but you can have conversations with your data that are based on, again, the center of the distribution. So you are querying your results in a way that if you're like, hey, who should I sell this product to if I only could target one group? It will return that type of data for you, which is what it did for our client yesterday. A very specific demographic subset, a very specific style of person that was going to buy his product in very specific parts of the United States. And I think that that's a really powerful use of the chat feature, and it builds over time. And the more projects that you run, they can learn from each other. So it's not just here's one off and here's my chat. It's you can have an entire body of market research data in here and say, based on these several studies that I've run on this platform, what do I do? Which campaign do I run next? How do I really get in front of people? So I think that's really important. The smart search is also, I think, really just getting to that point of being able to go back and query concepts in a way that's scientifically valid, because you're going to find so many ways to query with AI that are going to just return a summarization task that isn't really reflective of your data. So this is meant to bring you right back to the interviews to uncover concepts. It's a concept search, not a keyword search, which means anything related to chairs, if you've concept searched chairs, is going to come up. So a bit different than just a keyword search. And I think those are the important things. The key themes for us are the percentage of people in your data set who have talked about a thing. And then when you go into that thing, it will tell you the specific things that thing means. Economic concerns, we all know in this election, are important, but there are 5 very specific things that people in this data set meant when they were talking about economic concerns. And being able to respond with that specificity is what takes you from running a generic study where it's like, pick one of the 5 multiple choice options to an interview study where you're really getting to know people. Okay, I think that's it. I'm out of breath.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. If you have a
Customer
customer
list.
list, we can set up an integration so we can grab people off your website. Yeah, we can sample in pretty much any way you want.
What does the onboarding or setup process generally look like? It sounds like the design is the most important piece of getting valuable information out. So it doesn't sound like it's completely like turnkey DIY.
It is. So this is what the intake process looks like to set up a new project. So if you are, say, actually decide on something here, trying to decide on your new brand strategy and want to do some research around that, the platform is going to walk you through a series of natural language questions to get at what it is that you need to know. So you don't need to design the interviews yourself. That's all abstracted away. You talk through some about your brand, what it is that you already know about your customers, and what it is that you don't know that's making the decision that you're trying to make hard, and what the decision is that you're trying to make. You can upload research reports if you've run surveys before. You can include as much, the more detail you give it, the better, and then it will design a series of proposals for you of what to run and conduct. For the first project, we usually try to be fairly involved to make sure that you're walking through it in a way that's going to give the model everything it needs. In particular, making sure that there aren't half-sentence answers in these, and it's just not going to know what it needs. And then once the project is designed, it launches. So it is automated end-to-end. We've tried to make it something that you don't need to have any kind of special knowledge in research to be able to use.
You said a typical survey is out for a day or so. What is the kind of prep time typically add up to? Day, couple days, weeks?
Depends a bit on the target audience. So if you want to interview CEOs of pet stores, which is a request we got at one point, and there are 28,000 of those. That's probably going to take a couple weeks to be able to recruit those. If it's a general population study in the US, we say 24 hours, it'll probably be faster because those can come pretty quickly, depending on what time you launch it. If you're launching that at midnight, it's going to take a little longer, especially to be able to balance that geographically. So it depends a little bit, but for anything that's 50% of the population or more, it should be within 24 hours.
Cost to use.
Yeah, so it's a per project basis, and the real reason for that is the target audience changes the incentive that we have to pay to be able to recruit people. But it starts for a general population study at about $8 an interview, and then increases as the target audience gets smaller. Generally, anything between about 60% and 100% of the US population is going to come in around $8, and then it starts to increase once you get lower than that.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
right on time, y'all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.